Always respected the coverage of basketball. Many things with Matt Norlander, CBS Sports. He had a story that caught my attention, read the whole thing. How transfer portal, NIL, reshaping college basketball recruiting has dropped the value of high school prospects. And Matt joins Paul Catalina, David Smoke here on 365 Sports. Matt, thank you very much for your time. And I'm sorry to interrupt that dinner with your children. I hate that, but I do appreciate you finding time for us. So is it the transfer portal, or is it maybe even one more year left for some with COVID year? Is that affecting what's happening with high school prospects?
There's a lot going on. Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it. And kids actually just finished the dinner. Wife and I we're gonna sit down once this radio interview is over, so it's all good.
Good, thank you.
So there's a lot going on. So yeah, I went out to a few of the recruiting things in June, which I'm sure some of your listeners are aware. But real quick, in June, the Baylor staff and all college coaching staff, they went and watched their recruiting targets play with their high school teams. So the people that they spend most of the year with, they saw them in that environment, which is a good environment, but a different environment because you're with the guys most. You're going to probably play truest to your role. In July, they're playing on the shoe circuit, which they also play in April, and that's with the most talent around them and against the best high school talent in the country. And as I went out in June, I just kind of took stock of, what I was seeing at a couple of different events. The coaches were not there in the same numbers as they had been in many previous years. And, getting to talking to a couple of coaches, it just became clear that due to a number of factors, and with a number of pieces of evidence that were obvious, one of them being that many high major programs are not filling up all scholarships on their rosters. It indicated to me that the high school recruit is not valued now the way that they were 3 years ago, and definitely not a decade plus ago. And the biggest factors for this are, one, yes, we have the bonus COVID year. So we have 2 more seasons where college players are able to get an extra year of eligibility. And because of that, yes, the overwhelming majority of those players are staying in college. And there is a value to a 22-year-old man versus an 18-year-old guy just out of high school, clearly. And that combined with the transfer portal truly going mainstream a couple of years ago. And, oh, by the way, with all of this name, image, and likeness legislation, then creating a market wherein many players are seeking a lot of money for going into the portal, going to a new spot. It has created a volatile set of circumstances with recruiting and the portal. And because of all of this, high school players, I'm not talking about guys ranked 1 through 20 in the rankings. I'm not talking about the guys that could be one and doneers or some of the best other freshmen to be in the country. I'm talking about everyone else. Those players, while they are obviously still being recruited, there is an anticipation that those guys will mean less to a roster than we have seen in literally decades. You might even have to go back to the 1980s when the last time we had freshmen that were basically looked at as contributing pieces, bit pieces on a roster. And so the question in the piece is, are we just in a passing phase right now? Will this bob back up a little bit in 2 years once that bonus COVID year isn't there? It could. There's some wandering curiosity if there might eventually, I'm not saying this is in the works or it'll happen, but wandering curiosity, will there eventually be a permanent situation where guys get 5 years of eligibility? I would argue it's actually good for college basketball to keep it as old as possible, to have familiar names and you'll have better play, but we'll see if we ever get there. If we don't, does it bob back up? Or will we be in a situation where this year the portal had more than 1,800 names in it? Will it be, 1,500 plus? And if that's the case, will we just see the freshman that is wanting to step in and be a factor just not have that much impact? Because one other thing here, I know I'm going long, but it's a very complex issue. The thing is, if you are a 4-star freshman, right, you're pretty highly touted. If you're a 4-star recruit coming out of high school, you have been recruited by a number of high major programs, and you have been, for 1, 2, 3 years, you have been chased. Like you feel good about your prospects, and rightfully so. You probably have a pretty healthy ego. But if you are a 4-star recruit, guess what? When you step in, I mean, there's a chance you might start maybe, but you're not going to be the best. You're not going to be option 1. You're not going to be option 2, and you're probably not going to be option 3. And so, since this is a two-way street, because many times these recruits that are ranked anywhere from 20 to 200, they want to have more of a role in their first year. And whereas previously they had to suck it up or risk sitting out a year of transferring, now they're just like, nah, man. 17 minutes a game is not going to cut it for me. I'm going to hop in the portal after a year. And so because of that, they have reduced their value, because of their own behaviors. And yes, coaches are at fault for this as well. Very interesting situation we find ourselves in 2023.
So if you're a player ranked 60 to 80 or so, or 90 in the top 100 of recruits, what do you do now? Do Juco somehow have a renaissance here because this might be the best option for these guys?
Good question. I don't know if there's going to be a renaissance with that. And to be clear, like these players that are like, take the 80th ranked player, like you're going to a power conference unless, there's a special circumstance where maybe like a mid-major plus, as we call it, or, a team from a multi-bid league, like an A-10 school, Mountain West school, like, occasionally those kind of guys will go to those schools. And I get that. Those players are, they need to be accepting when they get to college, and a lot of this has to do with their own, the own conversations they have with their parents and their coaches and their advisors, and then the coaches at these programs to be as honest as possible in the recruitment process, because so many coaches, they want to be as old as possible because, and listen, we watch the games, we love the games, but to hear it from the coaching side, like, yeah, unless the talent is like super special, you just straight up want to be putting out as many 21, 22, and yes, 23-year-olds. I mean, there will be 25-year-olds playing college basketball this season.
Mm-hmm.
That's like Javon Quinterly is going to play this season almost certainly for Memphis, and he's 25. Like he would go up against an 18-year-old. That's a massive difference, massive. And so, yeah, we could see a little bit of a renaissance with the JUCO, but it is an adjustment period, and I don't know how long it's gonna last, and if this is going to be the new normal or not.
How has this affected Calipari, who used to come in with 5 or 6 elite freshmen, high-ranked, best class every year? Has he changed his mind too?
Yes and no. So Calipari is quoted in the piece, and he is bringing in 5 highly touted freshmen. So that is happening again. All right, we are going to see that. Now, at one point, Calipari only had 7 scholarship players, and at one point, I mean like a month ago, okay? It was unthinkable to ever think that Kentucky would be in a spot where it had barely more than half of its allotted scholarships filled. Now he has been able to add some pieces in the portal, and he does have some experience there. Kentucky's situation in general is fascinating because the program has been all over the place over the past few years, and the fan base is certainly agitated because you're Cal. Like there's an expectation that you're going to be able to not just be relevant November to March, but then make deep runs in the tournament. I think he has tweaked it some, and to be clear, because I did talk to John Shire for this, he's not quoted in the piece, but like coaches like at Duke and Kentucky most specifically, but of course the blue bloods, North Carolina, Kansas. Even like a quasi blue blood like in Arizona, if they are able to recruit and get players ranked 1 to 15, 1 to 20, obviously you're going to take that. The talent there is so good. So he has probably modified it a little bit, but I would say it's not a major overhaul. When you watch Kentucky next season, you are going to see a lot of babyface newbies that are new to the sport, and that's led by 2 players, DJ Wagner, the former number 1 player in his class, and Rob Dillingham, who could be a big-time scorer as a freshman.
Do you think this will – I mean, we had the Wild Final Four last year that even though UConn, who's a blue blood, won, they came out of – they weren't in 1 seed this year. Do you think we'll see more of that down the line because of all this?
It's possible. Like there's a lot of different factors that go into what makes a national champion, and they aren't the same from year to year. But last season, I mean, UConn was a quality team much of the year that put it together. It wound up having a first round draft pick come off the bench, and that player is now returning, like Donovan Clingan.
Mm-hmm.
But last year, like Adama Sanogo, the Final Four MVP, he was one of the 3 best players in his conference for 2 straight seasons, and one of the best bigs in all of college basketball. You had a veteran transfer, Tristan Newton, who's returning this season. You had a lottery pick and one of the best shooters in the sport, Jordan Hawkins. You had maybe the best, I think the most multidimensional player, even if he wasn't a great shooter, and maybe the best athlete in the sport, and Andre Jackson. And like guys that played above their experience, like Alex Caravan, who was an older freshman there. So I think it's more likely than not. Like we'll see what happens in the year and the season to come here. Kansas is expected to be good. Purdue returns the National Player of the Year, but I am not. I'll tell you this: I am not anticipating that we'll have a national champion in college basketball that relies on how do I want to phrase this? I don't think for the next half decade we'll get a team that wins the title and they will have more than one freshman be one of their 4 most important players. You see what I'm saying? Like,
yep.
And they might have 2 freshmen starting in their top 5, maybe here and there, but I bet you that second freshman is the 5th best player. I just don't think that's the way it's going to happen anymore, at least in the short term, especially with the fact that last season college basketball literally statistically was never older than it was. This year will be similar to that. And so those teams, that's going to rise up. And also we're coming off a year where it was one of the weaker freshman classes collectively. Like we did have good freshmen, don't get me wrong. Brendan Miller was obviously, all the controversy aside, was a tremendous player. But you look around last season, the best players were Zach Edey, Trace Jackson Davis, Jaime Jaquez, a senior, Drew Timme, a senior, Jalen Wilson, a senior, Adama Sanogo, a junior, Jalen Pickett, Julius Tabellis, like up and down the roster, it was just experienced players. I think we're going to still see a lot more of that.
Well, and Baylor won the national title. They had guys return from that team, but that was an older team with Vital and obviously Paul just went play with Teague, with Butler, with Davion Mitchell. I mean, that was a team that was kind of, in fact, I think somebody that played in the tournament said those are some grown-ass men, excuse my language, that we played up against, and they were. And so you also, I get confused sometimes, as you mentioned, the high school prospects and who they're playing for or when. And I know that Baylor has the commitment from Robert Wright, heard a lot of great things about what he's done lately. What have you seen from Robert Wright and the number 1 overall player, Baylor's involved in this possibly in the end too, along with others, Trey Johnson, and how good he is?
I'll start with Robert Wright, who I saw play. He played the John Lucas team on Friday. That was an awesome game. And Robert Wright's team's final team won. Wright hit the 2 foul shots. I want to say they were funny. Scott Drew was on the other side of the gym, so he was basically like right next to Wright when he was shooting this. I want to say his team was down 1 when he went to the line with like 2 seconds to go. He sank both, and they won. I think that's what happened. It's something like that. He was terrific in the game. It's very, very poised, opportunistic. Not an outstanding shooter, at least in that game. And again, I want to be clear about this. I'm not a recruitnik. I go to a few recruiting events. I like to see some of the 5 stars. Occasionally, a 4-star or an unknown guy will catch my eye. But it was impossible for Robert Wright not to stand out in that particular game. I thought he was really, really good. And he's a good commit. Trey Johnson's talent is undeniable, and I know he's being pushed here and recruited by a number of the big boys. Like it's Baylor, Kentucky, Texas is in there. I think Bama's in there. I know I'm forgetting a couple others there. What's interesting about Trey Johnson is good build already. I thought he was pretty outstanding in the game that I saw him, and he is a willing distributor, pretty good defender, has some good knack for scoring. But this year's Peach Jam was all about Cooper Flagg, Cameron Boozer, his brother Caden Boozer helped them win the title, had the better game on Sunday in the final. AJ DeBonsa, who's a 26 player, Tyron Stokes, a 26 player, and so Johnson's a good player. I think he's third in his class, but he kind of flew under the radar just a little bit down at Peach Jam. but he's a good player, man. Now he's a 24, and like he's overshadowed a little bit by Dylan Harper, but he is the kind of guy I mentioned before, like the freshmen that are not going to be expected to step in and be impact players. Objectively speaking, I think that Trey Johnson is the kind of player, depending on where he goes and how he's used, I would think that he would be in the right system, one of like the 5 or 6 most productive freshmen, provided he stays healthy. Obviously a very good scorer, and his defensive willingness, I think, will go a long way. Intriguing player. I did like him a lot.
Hey, Matt, good stuff. It's interesting, man. That COVID year, I'm telling you, it really did change a lot of things. And like I thought it was over. And then again, no, it's not. As you mentioned, there's still 2 years left of that, and what it has to shape the way rosters are put together on top of NIL and transfer portal. It is absolutely amazing. Great stuff. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you very much.
All right. Have a nice evening,
You
fellas.
too.
Thank you.
Yep. Matt Norlander with us, CBS Sports. And Jerry W.